I can't think of a time when the need for the gospel it could be greater than the present age. I don't have time to go through a litany of things that, if I look around at the diagnosis for what is happening in our world and in our culture today, amen, I think that it would spin your head when we think about, well, 1 Timothy 3 says that we're living in times that are perilous, treacherous, trying, difficult, and it goes on to talk about some of the things. Now, when Paul wrote that in 1 Timothy, this was in the first century, and things were pretty bad then, and so I kind of feel like we've come full circle. The way culture has evolved now, amen, it isn't that much different. We may have technology and we may have certain things, certain refinements, but I want to say to you where the human heart is concerned and the condition of the human race is concerned, we are even more depraved, if that's possible, even more depraved now, or as depraved as we could ever be. In the last few weeks ago, we talked about this. We did a series on honor, and we talked about how much of a deficit there is for honor in our culture, in our world. You know, no one or nothing is sacred any longer. You know, we no longer respect authority. We don't respect the elderly. You know what I mean? There's some people you just don't mess with. Amen? Don't mess with the elderly. They've been here longer than you. They deserve your respect. There's some things you just, I just grew up knowing that you show, but the lines have been blurred. The lines have been blurred, and there's no respect anymore. Churches, there are places that you just don't mess with. Even if you didn't like religion, somewhere inside of your mind, you just knew, just don't mess with that church. Just keep walking. You don't throw stones at the church. You don't rob the church. But that's where we've reached in society, where nothing is off limits anymore. And no one would think that it's a big deal any longer to rob and to desecrate a holy place like a church. If you look around, you see things like human trafficking. The last statistic I have, most recent in 2016, there were over 25 million people that are being trafficked around the world, and that number has probably doubled or tripled since now. What am I doing? I'm saying to you that we seem to be getting better, but the fact is we're getting worse. And yet, the only answer for a world in turmoil is still the good news about Jesus. What God has given us as His church to share with a lost and dying world, it's still the only answer. You don't have to look for anything else. They say, was it one ring to rule them all? This is one message, amen, to rule them all. There's no other message other than the good news about Jesus that is going to change what we are witnessing as the world continues to spiral out of control. The gospel changes lives. It changes lives one soul at a time, one person at a time. And changed people change people. Changed people become God's agents of change. I could tell you the story about my own life when I got saved from out of that world, that I grew up in, and in the world of hip hop and gangs and all of that stuff. I wasn't a gangster, but I was in the world of hip hop before I got saved, when hip hop was from the late 70s into the early 80s, and God brought me out of that world, amen. And I thank the Lord, because I was reckless, I was out of control, and if I had stayed in that world, I promise you I could have done a lot of evil. Because power gives you the sense that you can do whatever you want to whoever you want. Look around and see for yourself. But God came and saved my life. And God has turned me into an agent of change today. One soul at a time, one life at a time, but don't underestimate the power of one changed life. Some of you have heard the song Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. If even sinners know that song, even atheists know Amazing Grace. It's the most popular song ever in the history of music. Did you know who wrote that song was an ex-slave trader from England named John Newton? John Newton used to go back and forth to the continent to bring us here to trade and to sell for his own good. And one day the gospel of Jesus Christ got a hold of him. changed his life forever. John Newton would, I heard tell that he would be on the boat, and those black slaves who were held in the belly of the ship at night began to wail. And they would sing that, and that stuck in his head. And when he got saved, he wrote a song. The same sound, the wailing of the African slaves brought him to the feet of Jesus. And he wrote the song. There's so many of us have sung. Just to sing it strikes an emotional chord in me, make me want to just fall down and worship God. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. But he came back, gave his life to the Lord, and became one of those who became an abolitionist and worked for the freeing of slaves. And the work that he has done, along with Wilberforce and others, remain, and it speaks for itself today. If you're black, you ought to give God praise for these people who even back then began to see how reprehensible slavery was and decided that somebody's got to stand up for the freedom of the black man. Come on and give God praise for an Englishman by the name of John Newton, talking about the power of the gospel and the power of a changed life. So if you ask yourself, why is there so much evil in the world, and how people in our city can even do the things that they're doing now? I mean, the answer is people need to know the Lord. People need Jesus. The prevalence of evil does not negate the power of the gospel. It necessitates it. I'll say it again. The prevalence of evil does not negate the power of the gospel. It necessitates it. In other words, the more dark it gets is the more light that we need to shine. We don't need to adjust our message. We don't need to change our message. We need to lean into the message, and we need to declare the message. It's still the only hope for mankind.